The next presenter is Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities, AODA Alliance, David Lepofsky, Orville, Endicott, and Courtney, Keystone. Welcome, and you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Please state your name for the record, and if there's any time left at the end of your presentation, we'll allow questions from all sides.
Good morning. With me are Orville, Endicott, and Courtney, Keystone. My name is David Lepofsky. I'm the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. 11 years ago, I and others convened a press conference here to call for accessible elections for voters with disabilities in Ontario who number over 1 million. 11 years later, we still don't have them. 11 years later, people with mobility disabilities continue to face the indignity of receiving a card from Elections Ontario saying their polling station is accessible, but never knowing till they get there if it really will be. They face the indignity of possibly having to be carried down steps just to be able to vote, or to have to find someone to run into an inaccessible polling station, to ask the scrutineers or the staff to stop letting everybody else vote so they could go outside and perhaps the person can vote in a car. People like me who are blind still face the double indignity that we cannot mark our own ballot and verify that we marked it right. We have to rely instead on someone else to mark our ballot and hope they get it right and hope they don't spoil it and hope they don't tell anyone, compounded by the fact that we are asked to swear an oath that the government has created this barrier in our path just to get that accommodation. The government promised us an accessible elections action plan, as did both opposition parties. The government and both opposition parties rose in unison 5 years ago to provide that this province would be fully accessible by 2025. Bill 231 will not fix those barriers to accessible elections now. They will not ensure accessible elections ever. What will it do? Well, at first it provides that Elections Ontario can do research and hold conferences. Great. We don't need legislation for them to do research. They say they've been doing it for over 7 years. And conferences, that's great. We won't be able to vote, and they'll have conferences. It says they may use accessible voting machines, but they don't have to. And what is thrown at us is what Mr. Sorbero just said. It's going to cost tens of millions. It's going to cost hundreds of millions. Mr. Sorbero, that's because your legislation is drafted to lock the government into the most expensive option. It forbids the use of technology that the banks have used for years to enable people like me and people like you to vote, to do our banking securely, safely, and in private from any telephone we pick up. Telephone voting would be cheaper, easier, more appealing to everybody. It can be done with security and safety and privacy, and it would cost way, way less. But not only doesn't this bill require it, not only doesn't this bill permit it, it forbids it. Your Section 23 includes a provision that forbids technology for voting accessibly that is connected to a network. So this bill creates a legal barrier to the cheaper solution, and then what we hear is what we heard just a few minutes ago, presented to CNIB. Blind people should be faced with the cruel choice of a very expensive option or foregoing their basic democratic rights. It's a cruel choice. It's not the choice we should be forced to face. It is not a choice that accessibility requires. But this bill locks us into that. What this bill doesn't do is requiring polling stations to be accessible. What it doesn't do is put in place a system to make sure that happens, because once a person with a disability gets to a polling station, finds that they can't get in, they can't come back the day after the election and vote then. The election's over. Now, what's the real guts of this bill? What did the Select Committee on Elections present us with, and what does the government put before us? It's a very simple message. Trust Elections Ontario. Let's let them have their research and conferences and so on, and let's hope they'll get it right. Oh, the bill does one more thing, in fairness. It allows for mail-in ballots and home visits by Elections Ontario. But it doesn't require those mail-in ballots to be accessible. It doesn't require Elections Ontario to do the home visits. They've got a discretion whether they'll do it or not. And no doubt if hundreds of thousands of voters with disabilities insist on home visits because they won't know until the election day whether they can get in the polling station, we'll be faced with an argument like we just heard a few minutes ago of, oh my God, that will cost thousands and thousands and millions of dollars. We can't have that. The cheaper option is just making the polling stations accessible. But that's not required here in this legislation, nor is there a measure to make it effective. Now, if you want to talk about cost, in fairness, you got to talk about the cost of doing accessibility versus the cost of not doing accessibility. What is the taxpayer exposed to if this bill passes as is, if it's not fixed to make elections accessible? I rely on the presentation you heard last week by the Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Barbara Hall. And what did she tell you? She told you that the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ordered that one single voter who faced one single inaccessible federal polling station was awarded $10,000 in damages. I invite you to take the numbers that Mr. Sorbera just added up. I'm picking on you just because we were classmates.
Yeah. You were always smarter than me, Dave. Let's put that on the record.
I encourage you, therefore, to accept our advice. Mr. Chair, may I ask that his heckles come out of my time?
Logically.
But what does that mean? If every voter who faces one of these barriers invokes the rights that Barbara Hall talked about, what does that mean the cost of inaccessibility will be to the taxpayer? Let's not solve this by litigation. Let's solve it by strong and effective legislation. Let's take a minute to look at the option that the Select Committee on Elections offered us and Bill 231 provides. Trust Elections Ontario. Now, they're hardworking and they mean well. They've been telling us for a decade that they really treat this as a priority. But what's their track record? A week ago, the Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Asenza, told you that they reported that 99% of the polls in Ontario in the 2007 election were accessible. But let's penetrate a little further. What he didn't tell you, and what was in his own Elections Ontario accessibility report that he tabled with you, is that they surveyed voters with disabilities and fully 44% reported difficulties voting, with polling locations and so on. What else did we learn? Mr. Asenza openly conceded that Elections Ontario has got to do substantially better on accessibility. He acknowledged that the reports that his own returning officers submit aren't necessarily accurate. Those are his representations to you. What did we learn? We learned that in Toronto Centre in the last by-election, they had an inaccessible poll because a principal decided a volleyball game was more important than basic democratic rights for voters with disabilities. We suggest that Trust Elections Ontario, no matter how hardworking and sincere they are, is not enough. It's also not enough because you've got to look at what Mr. Asenza told you were the reasons why he thinks things will be okay now. He said, we at Elections Ontario are still learning about accessibility. I asked members of the committee, how many of you think there's more to learn about the fact that people in wheelchairs can't go downstairs to vote? Is that a tough one? How about this? How much do we have to learn about the fact that if they can't get through the door, you can't get in? And these are pretty basic things. It's not rocket science. But they say they're still learning. With respect, they told us what they need is, the future is bright because They're going to do more consultations, but if you look at their 2007 report, they've been doing consultations with the disability community back to 2003 and before. We're delighted they've consulted. We're delighted they want to consult, but we suggest respectfully that's not the solution. And finally, they say they want to do more research and develop kits to give people, better kits to give their staff. Well, they, again, in their own report, have boasted about all the research they've done before 2007 and the great kits they've given out. We provided you documentation on this, and for anybody watching this on TV, all of the documentation we placed before the committee is in accessible format on AODAalliance.org for them to see. So what do you do about it? Let me summarize what we say you should do about it. You need to strengthen this bill to keep all your party's election commitments of an accessible elections action plan. You need to extend it to apply to provincial and municipal elections because both have the same barriers. The solutions are the same, and you cut the cost by avoiding requiring two levels of government to reinvent the same wheel. We say that you need to require accessible polling stations, but also put in details, legislated standards of what that means. Not just window dressing statement, all elections must be accessible. Not just window dressing statement, details. And there's got to be enforcement and monitoring. Require Elections Ontario to post their proposed polling sites 9 months or whatever in advance. Let us go out and check them out, make submissions, and if they don't, if Elections Ontario doesn't fix their plans to ensure accessibility, give us an expeditious, cheap right of appeal. There are ways to fix this. Provide for accessible voting machines. If you can't do it by this election, do it by 2015 and take off, require that it's got to be instituted, but more than that, take away Bill 231's current legislative barrier to ensuring that that kind of machinery is low cost and most widely available. And in addition, and we have 23 recommendations, and we don't have time to go through them all, but we respectfully suggest that it's important to make these provisions mandatory, put in timelines, and we're quite open to the idea of 2 stages. Certain things will have to be accomplished by the 2011 election, other things deferred perhaps to 2015 to make sure they really happen. Let me conclude with just a couple of observations. You folks bemoan the low voter turnout in elections. We're here for voters who want to vote, but face barriers that are eminently preventable. You're wringing your hands over possible solutions. You want to solve the problem of snow? You want to provide for cheaper access to more accessible polling stations? Here's one for you. Why not require this fixed date election to be at the end of June? The snow will have melted in most places. And if you've got a problem with indoor accessible locations, pitch a tent in the parking lot in front of the inaccessible church or school, and let people vote outside. It's the end of June. It won't be such a big deal. This is not rocket science. It is not hundreds and hundreds of $1 million. It is not a question of challenging a deficit that should be wisely spent elsewhere. It's a matter of doing what the Americans have been figuring out and what we should be figuring out. We respectfully request that you amend this bill, that you strengthen this bill, that you ensure that provincial and municipal elections are fully accessible to voters and candidates with disabilities, not only on voting day, but throughout the campaign process. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present.
Thank you, David, and thank you for coming. And there's no time left, so we'll move to the next deputant.